아, 네, 안녕하세요. 기상이 이렇게 눈이 많이 오는데 이렇게 굳은 길 뚫고 논문 성공 전략 참가해 주셔서 정말 감사하고요. 오늘 먼 길 미국에서 저희에게 특강 제공해 주시기 위해서 제프리 로빈스 박사님 오셨습니다. 박수로 환영해 주시기 바랍니다. 예, 예.
So good afternoon, everyone. So firstly, I'd like to thank everyone for taking the opportunity to join us this afternoon to talk about ways that you can improve the discoverability and the visibility of your published research. Now, why is that so important? Well, of course, you put in all of this time, effort, identifying a research question, designing your study, conducting the study, evaluating your results, writing the paper. You want to make sure all of that hard work is read. Otherwise, it's kind of wasted. And so that's really what we're going to be focusing on over the next hour or so. And then we're going to have a lot of time to answer any questions that you may have about the Nature portfolio of journals, publishing challenges, etc. Now, before we begin, I'd like to first briefly introduce myself. So my name is Jeff, and it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. So I received my PhD from the University of Pennsylvania in the United States. But once I received my degree, I decided to leave the US and move to Asia. So I've been living in Asia now for over 20 years. I'm currently based in Tokyo as I'm working from our Nature Japan office. Now, before I joined Nature, I was actively conducting research at institutes in Singapore as well as in Japan. In this time, I had published a number of articles in a variety of different journals, and I was actively involved as a peer reviewer for a number of international journals as well. But about 12 years ago, I decided to leave research, and so I joined an academic editing company that allowed me to work directly with the researchers and really help them improve the impact and the influence of their scientific message within their papers before sending them to their target journals. And then 9 years ago, I joined Nature as editorial development manager, where one of my key responsibilities is developing and conducting training workshops for researchers worldwide to help them improve the impact and the influence of their ideas in their field, or more broadly, in society. Now, although I work for Nature, we are part of a larger company called Springer Nature. So we also publish journals and books under our Springer brand. We have a range of open access journals under our BMC brand. Altogether, we publish over 3,000 journals across a range of different disciplines. And both the Nature side and the Springer side have been in business for over 150 years each. So we do have a lot of experience when it comes to academic publishing. And what we're hoping to do over the next hour or so is to share with you some useful tips and strategies that will be useful for improving the visibility of your published work. Now, of course, when people think of Nature, they're thinking about all of our journals, but Nature is a bit broader than just that. We also have a range of different products and solutions that we've developed to help to support researchers worldwide. One of them that we have are Nature Master Classes, which is the team that I work with. And we have our on-demand courses, which our universities can subscribe to. Now, I know Chonnam National University is subscribing to our on-demand courses. So I'm curious to see amongst you here, how many of you have already registered to take some of the online courses? Nobody. There's a lot of, now the university is paying for these courses, but for you, that means they're free. And there's a lot of really useful content that's been developed by our team, Nature editors, to try to share some useful strategies that can help you. At the end of the workshop, I will show you a QR code if you do want to register to make it a lot simpler for you. Now, in addition to our on-demand courses, we also have live training workshops where trainers or editors, such as myself, will actually visit directly with the university and will conduct a 1 or 2 day training workshop, as what we're doing here today in a smaller version of one. The benefit of these live training, it allows us to talk directly to you, but also gives you the opportunity to ask questions to us as well. So let's go ahead and start with what we're going to be covering in this next hour that we're going to be spending together. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is meant to focus on improving the discoverability of your article. And there's a variety of different strategies and tips that you can use to help you achieve that. First, we're going to talk about your title. How to ensure that you write a title that's going to be useful for the reader, but also easy for you to write as well. We're then going to talk about the importance of keywords in ensuring that your papers are more readily discoverable online in different databases after the paper's been published. And then finally, we're going to talk about an abstract, why they're important, for whom they're important for, and how can you write an abstract that is effective and clear for those readers. Now, why is it so important about discoverability? You may be thinking, Jeff, it's okay. I got a great study. I wrote a great paper. I published in a great journal. No worries, it's fine. But you are not alone. You're not the only person publishing papers related to your topic. You have a lot of competition. How much? Well, let's use this example. Let's just focus on one field, biology. How many papers do you think were published in biology alone just last year? 100,000? 200,000? 300,000? Or 400? Let me ask a few people. What do you think, sir? 400,000. He went straight for the top number. What about you, ma'am? 200,000, being a bit more conservative. Let's ask one more person over here. How about you, sir? 3, took right in the middle. Well, it is between 300,000 to 400,000. More specifically, 387,000 articles published in a single field. That means every single day last year, there are over 1,000 articles getting published in that one field. That is a lot of research. You are not alone in publishing your paper, but you want to make sure all of that hard work is going to be discovered and read by people in your field, helping you to establish your reputation, which is going to be essential in your career progression in academia. You need to ensure that paper will stand out. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today. What are some useful strategies you can simply use to ensure that amongst all of those other articles, yours is the one people sees? Yours is the one they want to read. Yours will be the one that's going to have influence, be cited, give you chances for international collaborations, be invited to give talks at international conferences, etc. So let's first start off with the title. Now, titles today are a lot more important than they were maybe 30 years ago. 30 years ago, if you wanted to read an article, of course, you didn't go to your computer. Most of those databases didn't exist. You have to physically go down to your library, find your favorite journal on the shelf, take it down, and look through it. Now, of course, you're going to see the title of those papers, but you're also going to see the figures, the data, the entire article. And this entire article, and probably especially the figures, that will determine whether or not you want to read that paper. If so, you photocopy it, and now you can read it. That's not how people find research anymore. Most people, and I'm sure you all do as well, you go online to your favorite database, whatever it may be, put in keywords related to your research, and then what you're going to see is just page after page of titles. This is what people see. This is what's going to increase the chances that someone says, this is a study I'm interested in. This is a paper I want to read. Now, in this case, I searched for van der Waals heterostructures. That's a two-dimensional material. And I limited my search for 5 years. And we can see over 4,000 papers just on that one topic. That's 800 articles a year. Again, you have a lot of competition. So people then decide which of these articles they want to read based on the title that you write. And that's why your title will be so important and really help increase the chances someone clicks on that title and reads that abstract. So let's talk about some important points you should keep in mind. Firstly, and obviously, what's most important is that your title reflects what you achieved. What is the accomplishment of that study? That's what you want to tell people. But it also needs to contain keywords. Now, this is important for two reasons. One, it's going to be important for indexing of your paper in databases. So databases will index those articles based on the keyword list and the title. So if you don't have good keywords in your title, you are decreasing its discoverability online. But it also means you don't want to be redundant. So if you have a word in your title, don't put the same word in your keyword list because they're going to be redundant, and redundancy won't help you improve discoverability. But it's also going to be important for your readers, because if I'm looking for van der Waals heterostructures, well, those titles with van der Waals heterostructures in them will get my attention first. I know these studies are about what I'm looking for. If I see a title that does not have that keyword that I'm looking for, I would likely assume it's a false match. And it's probably not relevant for me, which means I would not click on it, read the abstract to get more details about that study. That author now has lost that chance for impact. So do make sure the most important keywords about your study are in the title. And lastly, please keep them short. I recommend no longer than 10 to 12 words. Why? Well, if you have these short titles like this, in this case, I looked for this protein called PDL1 expression in tumors, 5,000 papers in 5 years. But when you see these titles that are less than 10 to 12 words, they fit on one line or maybe 1.5 lines. They're quick. They're easy to read. What about this one? How many of you would actually take the time to read this entire title? Not many. You look at some of those words, never mind, skip it, move on to the next one, which means this author is now losing the opportunity to be read, to have impact. So please keep your titles short. Now, those are some key things to keep in mind, but there are also some things I encourage you to avoid. My number one recommendation of what you should not do is try to write something clever. Usually these type of clever titles, they're only clever to the author. They're usually confusing to everybody else. Everyone's trying to figure out, what is this study about? Let me show you an example. Charming penguins strike back. Anyone have any idea what this study is about? Not at all. I'm sure these authors were really proud of themselves. Yes, this is a great title. But people see this title online. We know it's about physics because it's published in a physics journal, but we have no clue what they investigated, what they accomplished. Most readers don't have time to click on every single title to read the abstract. You can think of yourself, your reader. You want to quickly find those papers. You're very busy people. These titles don't help you. And journal editors don't like them either. Let me show you an example. So here's a paper. This was the preprint, so before publication in Archive. The Matrix Reloaded on the Dark Energy Seesaw. Again, I'm sure these authors were really proud of themselves with this title. They submitted to one of the top journals in physics, Physical Review Letters. And do you think that that's what the title got published? Here's the published title. Seesaw Mechanism for Scalar Fields is Possible Basis for Dark Energy. These are the types of titles editors and reviewers prefer. They're actually descriptive about the study and not related to some pop culture that a lot of people simply won't understand. So please avoid clever titles. You also want to avoid being too vague. Now, what I mean by this are titles like an investigation of or an evaluation of. Yes, you're publishing a research paper. People already know you're investigating something. You're evaluating something. That's obvious. They want to know specifically what is being investigated, what is being evaluated. They don't want to have to guess. So be more specific in your title. That's going to be appropriate for your research audience. That means if you're going to submit your paper to a specialized journal because you feel that your study is very specialized and would likely only be read by people in your specific research area, then you can use more specific terminology in the title because those readers are likely familiar with those terminology. But if you think that your title or your study is going to have broader implications and will be of interest to people in other research areas, or maybe even other fields, in those cases, you would probably choose a broad focus journal to reach that broad audience. But that also means that your readers that you're trying to attract are likely not familiar with a lot of specialized technical words that you maybe use when you're talking about your research. So in those cases, the titles need to use more general terms that's going to be appropriate for the broad audience. So when I say about being specific, always keep your readers in mind and write the titles that's appropriate for who you think would actually be interested in your work. Related to that, you also have to be careful with abbreviations. So again, a specialized journal means you're trying to attract a specialized audience where they're likely familiar with a lot of common abbreviations and acronyms that you use. So for specialized journals, using commonly used abbreviations and acronyms, usually okay. But again, if you're trying to target a broad audience, they're probably not familiar with those abbreviations or acronyms. And if you use them in the title, they won't know what they mean. And if they don't understand the abbreviation, they don't understand your title. And that's why editors of broad focus journals want you to avoid abbreviations. So it's going to be more relevant for a broader audience. Always keep your readers in mind. And lastly, you don't need to say that you discovered something new or novel. If you're not aware, this is one of the most important criteria for publication. One of the most important things editors and reviewers consider. Is this research new and novel? If it's not, it won't get published, which means everything that's published is publishing something new by default. So you don't have to say what you have is new. Your readers know that already. You're just using unnecessary words that's not communicating anything valuable for your potential target audience. Now, although I often go through kind of what I recommend to include or exclude, many people say, okay, this makes sense. But know what, Jeff? It's not easy to do. Writing a title is a challenge, at least a good title. Actually, it doesn't have to be. There's a very simple strategy you can use to write a clear and effective title very quickly. Again, we always need to keep our readers in mind. What do the readers want to know about your study? Well, they want to know what you're investigating. It could be a variable, a condition, a strategy, a model. And of course, whatever you're investigating is having some sort of effect. Well, they want to know, well, what effect are you measuring? That's your key outcome or outcomes. And of course, whatever your effects that you're measuring, they're being measured from somewhere. That's your sample. It could be participants, animals, materials, sites, databases. These are the three things your readers want to know about your study. What are you investigating? What are you measuring? And from where are those measurements taken from? And as long as your title includes these three things, you have a clear and effective title. Let's look at an example. Curvature sensing peptides for enhanced cancer immunotherapy. Now, I took a published paper that originally had all three factors, and I removed one of them. So what do you think I removed from this title? Do you think that I removed the variable, what's being investigated, the outcome, what's actually being measured, or the sample from where these measurements are taken from? Who thinks I removed the variable? Raise your hand. Outcome? Okay, a few people raising for outcome. Sample? Okay, for the people that did participate, seems the most popular option was outcome, and you're correct. What they're investigating are these peptides, and of course the sample is whether or not they're going to be useful for cancer immunotherapy. But what effect are these peptides having? It's not clear. So if you look at the study, so you don't have to read the abstract, we can identify the three key factors. They're investigating these peptides. They're measuring their effects on tumor-derived exosomes, and the sample would be cancer immunotherapy. So all you have to do then is put these three factors together, and here's the published title that we published this year in Nature Materials. Curvature sensing peptides inhibits tumor-derived exosomes for enhanced cancer immunotherapy. We have the variable having impact on the outcome in that sample. Everything you need to know about the study is clearly described. But there's something else we're going to learn about the study as well. What was the effect? So let me ask someone on this side. So these peptides have some sort of effect on those exosomes. What is that effect? Give you a hint, look at the active verb. You see any active verb? What comes after peptides? What do you think, sir? What's the word after peptides? Inhibits. So in this case, they're telling us what the effect is as well. So now we know, and this is a nice, clear, easy way to write a title. Here's your variable. You can use an active verb to describe the impact on the outcome for that sample. Very simple. And tells the reader everything they need to know about the study. Now, you don't always have to use an active verb. Let me show you another example. Resilient yet entirely degradable, that's the outcome, what they're measuring. Gelatin-based biogels, that's the variable, for soft robots and electronics, sample. Again, all three key factors still described, but this time we have the outcome describing the variable, which means we don't need to use an active verb. So whether you prefer to put the variable first, followed by the outcome, or outcome and then the variable, both are okay. What's most important is that all three of these factors are described in the title. And by doing so, you'll be telling the reader everything they want to know about your study. Now that we've talked about how do you write a title, as you can see, it's not hard at all. It should be very quick and very easy for you to do so. But let's now talk about how these titles are organized. Right, in this case, I use a database called Dimensions. You can go into Scopus, Web of Science, or any other database. You put in keywords. In this case, 4,000 titles. Some of these titles are at the top. That means other titles are at the bottom. Nobody gets to the bottom of the list. Yeah, most people would look at the first page of titles, second page of titles, maybe the third page, depending on how much time and motivation you have. But that basically means any titles that are found maybe after position 150, nobody sees. Doesn't matter how well written that title is. Nobody will see it. Nobody will click on it. No one will download that paper. Well, that means it's quite important then to understand how these databases decide how to organize these titles. A lot of researchers don't really consider that. I never did when I was a researcher. So how do you think these databases know how to organize the titles? Which papers go at the top? Which ones go at the bottom? Any idea, sir?
Recent.
Okay, so maybe more recent. So in some cases, you can order it by date. By the default, usually it's going to be based on relevance or best match. So in this case, it's not going to be based on date. But you're certainly correct. We could change this to sort by date. But usually the default is relevance. How does this database know what's relevant? Keywords. Exactly. Often when I talk to researchers and I ask, how do you come up with your keywords? They say, oh, I don't know, Jeff. Journal just said I needed 6 to 8 keywords, so I just wrote some down. Those are the titles at the bottom of the list. That's exactly how these databases determine relevance. So if you really want to make sure that your paper is discovered once it's published, you need to have good keywords, and you also should use SEO. Anyone know what SEO stands for? Would anyone like to guess? So these databases, the search engines, that's what the SE stands for. What do you think O stands for? Organization, great guess, very close. Optimization. Basically, this is search engine optimization. All search engines do this. You can go online, open whatever search engine is your preference, type in best car in the world. Maybe Bentley is the first hit. Why? Because they've optimized their website to be more discoverable for that keyword search. You can do the exact same thing with your article as well. These databases are using these algorithms and assigning your paper a relevancy score. Those with higher relevancy scores, top of the list. Low relevancy scores, bottom of the list, where you don't want to be. So having good keywords is one first step. But in addition to that, always make sure that you optimize the use of those keywords in your paper. I'll show you how to do so shortly. But let's first talk about good keywords. Well, good is a comparative word. If something is good, that means something is bad. And sometimes it's useful to share with people to define what I mean by good by showing you something bad first. So here's a paper in neuroscience, not really relevant, but I just want to emphasize that some of these keywords, they looked okay, but some of them looked really strange to me. Connect-based virtual reality training. Region of interest. Grant-supported paper. So I thought, are these actually good keywords? Well, this journal is indexed in a database called PubMed. So I went into PubMed, I limited the search to 5 years, and I asked myself, if I searched for these keywords, how many articles did I actually find? Let's go through this together. First, I looked at Connect-based virtual reality training. If you don't know what Connect is, here's a picture. It's made by Microsoft. It's a virtual reality companion for their Xbox. So when I search for this, I'm searching for those papers using virtual reality to train, specifically only using this device, nothing else. So in that case, do you think I found a lot of papers or very few? A lot of papers or very few? Very few, exactly correct. I found 8. Of the hundreds of thousands of articles in PubMed, only 8 matched this keyword, which tells us this is too specific. No one's actually going to be searching for papers with this specialized keyword. Therefore, it's not useful. What about region of interest? Of course, region of interest is a very vague general term. It's used in lots of different research areas. So when I use something that's very generic like this, do you think I found a lot of papers or very few?
A lot.
A lot. You're exactly correct. In fact, I found over 290,000 papers. That means this article is being diluted out by over 290,000 others. What do you think is the chances of this paper to be found at the top? Not very good. Not a good keyword. Too broad to be useful. What about grant-supported paper? Let me briefly explain how these databases are determining this. These are abstracting databases, which means they're looking at your keyword list, your title, and your abstract. When was the last time you read an abstract where the author said, by the way, we are a grant-supported paper? Someone on this side. Do you think I found a lot of papers or very few? Do you think a lot? Okay, she thinks a lot. What about you? Few? Now, in the acknowledgement section, yes, people will describe the funding, but that's not what's looked at by these databases. They only look at the abstract. And with that information, maybe not surprisingly, only one paper, this one, telling us again, nobody searches for research. Everyone assumes research is going to be grant supported. That's not a common search term people use, telling us it's not a good keyword. Now, a more appropriate one, like neurological rehabilitation, gives us 12,000. And that's probably okay. Now, often when I show people this, they say, okay, Jeff, what is the number of articles I should be looking for so I can feel confident that's a good keyword? Unfortunately, I hate to tell you, there is no magic number. I wish there was. I wish I could say it needs to be this number. But there's too many variables that will influence how many articles you find. So for example, your database. Scopus indexes about 26,000 journals. But if I'm using like something like PubMed that only indexes 6,000 journals, of course, I'll find a lot more articles in Scopus because it's a broad, focused database. Also, it's going to be dependent on the time frame. Right? I used a 5-year publication window. If I only looked at 1 year, I would find fewer articles. If I didn't limit, I would find a lot more. And it's also going to depend on how popular or common that topic is. Something that's being investigated globally will have a lot more research articles than something that's very regionally specific. And a topic that's being investigated across a broad range of research areas or even fields will have a lot more papers than something very niche or specialized. So because of all of these different variables, I can't tell you what number is going to be right. But what I can tell you is how to determine it on your own. And it's not hard. You simply determine it empirically. I just gave you an example. Search for those keywords. Those that give you a really large number of articles are probably too broad to be useful. Don't use them. Those that have very small number of articles are going to be too specific to be useful. Don't use them. And those that are more medial, in between, those are the ones you can feel more confident are going to be useful for people in the field. So it's quite easy, and I'll show you an example of how to do this in a moment. So first step is you need to then start with a short list of keywords. Now, when I say keywords, I don't actually mean like a single word. In fact, we usually recommend to use a phrase, like 2 or 3 words. That allows you to be a bit more specific and help to target your specific study. So for example, if I was looking at photonic integrated circuits, I would not want to use circuits as a key word. It's too broad. I want to be a bit more specific. To show you an example, if I put circuits into SCI, so Web of Science, 130,000 articles, but not only is a lot of articles, they're from a range of different disciplines. You have circuits for engineering, but also neural circuits for neuroscience. Completely different field, which means you're diluting your paper not just amongst a lot of other papers, but from a broad variety of fields and research. And that's not useful for you. But if I look at photonic integrated circuits, about 2,500, going to be more appropriate. But again, if we look at the fields, we can see they're all pretty much in the same research area, which means your article is being placed with other similar articles, telling you feel more confident. That's where you want your paper to be. So when I talk about keyword, I'm actually referring to a phrase in most cases. So once you have those keywords, then what you want to do is test them. Databases, plural. Don't just test one. Let me ask everyone a question. Who uses Web of Science to search for articles? Raise your hand. A few people. Scopus? A couple of people. Google Scholar? IEEE Explorer? PubMed? Okay, so some are broad, But as you can see, not everyone is using the exact same database. Some people use mostly broad focused databases, like maybe Scopus, Web of Science, or Google Scholar. Others are going to use more specialized databases like IEEE, Explore, PubMed, or many others. You can never guess what database people are going to use. So if you only test in a broad focused database, and then some of your readers are using specialized ones, maybe the keywords you've chosen will not be appropriate. So my recommendation, test your keywords in a specialized database related to your discipline, and also a broad focused database. And those keywords that look best in both are the ones I would prioritize. Maximize the chances that regardless of what people use, they will hopefully find your paper. So let's say I was interested in how a heavy metal like cadmium, which is often found in pollution, may be having impact on human health in society. That's my study. And I came up with all these different potential keywords that I think would be appropriate. And I searched in SCI for 5 years, so Web of Science. In this case, what we can see, some of these keywords give us really large numbers, hundreds of thousands of articles, too broad to be useful. This one, assisted phytostabilization, gave us only 170 articles, very few, telling us it's probably too specific to be useful. But if we look at the other ones, we can see they're more medial. They're going to be about 10-fold higher than assisted phytostabilization, but 10-fold less than some of these broad ones. And because they're in the more middle range, these would be the ones I would feel more confident that people are using to search for articles and are going to be relevant for my research. And then these would be the ones I could then test in a specialized database to see if it gives me a similar type of profile. If so, great. I've identified which keywords are probably best for my study. As you can see, it will only take you a few minutes to do this. It's not very challenging. Now, once you go through this, you should be able to discard 4 or 5 keywords that are not appropriate. Great. Now what we want to do is use maybe 2 or 3 of the most important ones in the title, and all the rest put into the keyword list. Why? Well, the algorithm will see both, but people will only see the title. Most people would either never see the keyword list, some journals don't even publish it, or B, they certainly won't see it when they're looking for articles. So to make sure that both the algorithm and people see those keywords, make sure they're in your title. They're usually the ones reflecting your variable, your outcome, and your sample are the most important keywords you want to consider. So now we finished the first step. Shouldn't take you very long. But now what we want to do is optimize those keywords to improve our relevancy score and our discoverability. How do we optimize those keywords? I gave you a hint earlier. These databases will search your keyword list, your title, and what else? I said there's 3 things they're looking at. What's the third thing that these abstracting databases look at? Any idea? What's an abstracting database? It has abstracts, which means your keywords need to be in the abstract. If it's not, they're simply going to assume great keyword, not relevant for your study, low relevancy score. But if they see those keywords in your abstract several times, that tells the algorithm those keywords are relevant for your study. High relevancy score, top of the list. Let me show you an example. So here again, I searched PDL1 expression, the name of this protein, and tumor. Now, if you remember, there was about 5,000 articles. Here's number 1. Why is it number 1? Well, the keyword are both in the title, PDL1 expression and tumor. But look how many other times those keywords are found in the abstract. A lot. That tells this database that this study is definitely very relevant for this keyword search. No wonder then it's number one. Let's move about 500 spots down. So we still have PDL1 expression in the title, but we don't have the keyword in the title, tumor. But if we look through the actual abstract, we can now see PDL expressions only used once, tumor used twice. Less relevant. So again, being pushed 500 spots down to 501. Let's go down even further. What about position 1000? So for position 1000, if this will connect, there we go. The keywords are not found in the title at all. Tumors used twice in the abstract, that's it. The reason it came up is PDL1 is probably in the keyword list. That's probably why it's in it at all. But because it's not being optimized in the abstract, it tells the algorithm, not useful, not relevant. And so it's being put at a position where probably nobody would ever get down and seen it. So again, I encourage you, once you get and have identified those keywords, please put them in the abstract. You'll improve the discoverability in those abstracting databases. Well, not all databases are abstracting databases. In fact, the most popular one, not just in this room, but also worldwide, is Google Scholar. And Google Scholar will not just use an abstract, it will use the entire paper if they can find it. And Google is usually pretty good at finding that paper somewhere online. But when they're doing their keyword matching, they're going to realize some parts of the paper are more relevant or important than others. So they're going to give those different sections different weights. Most important, just like abstracting databases, title and the abstract. But they're also going to look at your subheadings. If they see that you've used that keyword in your subheading, it tells Google that this keyword is relevant for my study. Higher relevancy score. And they're also going to look at your figure captions. If you're using that keyword to describe your data, then of course it's going to be relevant. Higher relevancy score. But the rest of the main text is mostly ignored. You may also be surprised you don't see keyword list here. And that's because, as I mentioned, many journals don't publish the keyword list, which means that Google would not have access to them. But these parts of the paper, regardless of the publisher, will be accessible to Google online. Now, Google goes a step further. They're not only doing keyword matching, they also use what's called the page rank algorithm. And what this does, it tries to determine how many links are pointing to your article. The more links Google sees, they assume then that that paper is more relevant for the field because people are discussing your paper online. So you can also maximize your discoverability in Google Scholar, not only by using the keywords here, but by promoting your research after publication. Social media, institutional websites, personal blogs. The more links Google sees, it will improve its relevancy score even more. Now, one thing that I don't put on here, which is another thing that will influence the relevancy score for Google Scholar, but you don't have any control over right away, that's citations. Google, if they see a paper that has a lot of citations, they assume it's widely cited, it must be relevant, higher relevancy score. But generally, most papers require 2 to 3 years to accumulate enough citations to influence the algorithm. So there's nothing you can do about it right now. But these things you can do immediately upon writing and publishing your paper. Now, the reason I like to mention about citations is as people frequently use Google Scholar, you may notice that a lot of the top hits tend to be kind of old articles, and that's because they have thousands of citations. And that citations is really overwhelming the algorithm, placing them at the top when they may or may not actually be relevant for what you're looking for. So my recommendation, if you're going to be using Google Scholar to avoid that citation influence, is to limit your search to the last 2 years. If you're limiting your search for the last 2 years, you're just going to be limiting the algorithm to this information. Some papers are widely cited because they're really bad papers, or there's some problem with that paper, or maybe they're related to some policy, even though not directly related to this specific area of study. So to avoid that citation influence, you can simply limit the search when you're doing Google Scholar. So far now we've talked about how do you write a good title. Nice, simple strategy. We've talked about the importance of keywords, how to identify the right ones, and how to optimize their use to improve your discoverability. And by doing so, hopefully that will lead people to your abstract. Now, I would argue that your abstract is the most important part of the entire article for a number of different reasons, but probably most importantly, related to this question. How many articles do you read every week? Ask a few people. How about you, ma'am? How many articles on average? Some weeks you read more, some less. About 3, okay. Ask somebody else I haven't had a chance to speak with yet. How about you, ma'am? About 3. Okay, I seem quite low numbers. Maybe someone over here has a bit higher. What about you, ma'am? Around 2. Okay. But why aren't you reading more? Are you busy? Yes. I think you probably all can agree you're very busy people. Your job is not just sitting down in your chair reading articles all day. You're expected to do research, classes, meetings, committees. There's a lot of other responsibilities you have to take care of. You're not alone, but that's true for all researchers worldwide. Most people simply don't have time to read everything. But I showed you a couple of different examples earlier, one from material sciences, one from life sciences. For any specific topic, there could be close to 1,000 articles a year published on that topic. Nobody reads 1,000 articles a year. And what a lot of people do, because of your busy schedules, they try to stay up to date by reading abstracts. Abstracts you can read quite quickly, and at least be familiar who is doing what and how is that related to your own research. Well, that's fine from a researcher's perspective. But from the author's perspective, we need to then remember, for most people in the field, they will not read your papers. They're probably just going to read your abstract. Now, of course, I'm sure they wish they could read your paper, but just like you, they are too busy. So that means for most people in your field, your only chance to communicate what you've done, why it is important or relevant, will be with the abstract, which is why it's so important to write it well. And if you do really make a good first impression because you wrote a really good abstract, well, there's a good chance then that those readers would want to download your paper. You may be the only, out of the 2 or 3 papers they read every week, yours will be the one they choose. You're increasing the chances people are more familiar with your work. Well, that's fine for people in your field, but for who else do you think abstracts may be useful for? So, of course, you write your paper, you submit it to a journal. Who's the first person to read it? The editors, exactly. Editors will often In the editorial evaluation, they'll read your cover letter, abstract, and if that's interesting for them, they probably would want to spend more time reading your full text manuscript to get more details about what you've accomplished because you've made a strong first impression with them with that cover letter and abstract. And if you make that strong first impression, they think it looks like it's suitable for publication in their journal, suitable or relevant for highlighting important topic in the field, they're going to send it to some other people. Who do they send your paper to? Yeah. Reviewers. But they're not really reviewers yet. First, before they get those reviewers, they have to invite people. Now, when they're sending these invitations to these potential referees, they can't send them your full paper. That violates confidentiality. They cannot see your full paper until they agree to be a reviewer. So what the editor sends in the invitation email, your title, and your abstract. That's it. And with that information alone, they need to decide, do I want to take time out of my busy schedule to read this paper, to give this author my expert advice to help them improve the quality of their study, the importance of their paper, for free? Most people aren't getting paid to be a reviewer, and it's anonymous in most cases, so you can't even thank them for their help and support. Now, of course, when editors are choosing potential referees, we're choosing those people that we feel have the greatest expertise, which means those experts have a lot of invitations. When I've talked to some of these really reputable researchers, they say they get invitation emails daily. Most of them they'll decline because they don't have time. So if you really want to get the best people to evaluate your study, to give you their expert advice and help and support on how to improve your quality of your work, you need to impress them with your abstract. Because if they read that abstract, even if they don't know who you are, they may want to review your paper because they think your study looks important for them. No other part of your paper has such broad-reaching influence than your abstract for a variety of different people and for different reasons, which is why you need to write it well. Well, what do you want to include? Well, again, we need to keep our readers in mind, right? You're not writing your paper for yourself. You know what you've done. You're trying to share what you've done with others. Well, one thing that they want to know is, why does a study need to be done? This is especially important for editors and reviewers. They want to make sure that you are addressing an important topic for the field that's currently relevant, and you have an important research question which demonstrates the novelty and the originality of your study. Without that information, they may worry you're simply repeating what others have done, or the topic is not going to be currently relevant for the field. So you need to include this important background information. Of course, you need to describe what you've done. Don't have to give a lot of details, but just summarize your study design so whoever's reading your abstract knows how that data was collected. Of course, you need to include your key results. Remember, this may be the only chance you have to share what you've accomplished with the field. Choose your 3 or 4 most important results and summarize them in the abstract, emphasizing their value and importance. And of course, how will this study impact or influence the field, or more broadly, society? This is going to be especially important for editors because they have a responsibility for their journal. They have a responsibility to publish papers that are going to be useful for the field or useful for society. And this is how you can tell them about why your research would in fact have that use. So these are the 4 key things that you need to include in your abstract, which if you look at it, it's quite similar to a paper, right? Your introduction, methods, results, and conclusions. Well, it's not surprising because this is essentially a summary of your paper. Problem is, unlike your paper that usually has sections, for most fields, the abstract is not. Just written like a paragraph. And because of that, we often see that some key information is lost or not included in that abstract. So my recommendation to ensure that doesn't happen to you is write your abstract section by section. Just write it one section at a time and focus what needs to be communicated within that section. So start off, for example, with a background. Usually 2 sentences is sufficient, no more than 3. For 2 sentences, my recommendation, first sentence should introduce the topic and emphasize why that topic is currently important for the field. Like these authors said, directed differentiation of human pluripotent stem cells to kidney organoids brings the prospect of drug screening, disease modeling, and the generation of tissue for renal replacement. Introduce the topic, why that topic is important. Great. Second sentence should then introduce your research question. This is crucial. Don't leave this out. What is the problem your study is trying to solve? Because this is what emphasizes the novelty of your work. And I recommend to use what we call signposting, using signs or clues to tell people where key information is. A great signposting word for research questions is however. Anytime someone's quickly reading an abstract or a paper and you see the word however, most people slow down. They're going to read that next sentence more carefully. Use that to draw attention to what's novel about your work. After you have maybe there's 2 sentences, maybe 3 if you need 2 sentences for background, but try to keep it to 2. You're done with the first section. Great. Now we want to move on to the methods and aims. Usually this can be communicated in a single sentence. 2 easy strategies to do so. In this study, we use this methodology to evaluate this aim. This is exactly the strategy these authors have used here. You could also say in this study, we evaluated this aim using this methodology. Either's fine, but it allows you to communicate your study design and your aims in a concise sentence. Keep it short. Why? You want to spend most of the abstract focused on your results. Right? That's what's really important about your work. You want to really dedicate as much space as possible to your findings. So after you have this sentence done, now you can move on to your results. Again, using keywords. We demonstrate, we show, we find. Letting the readers know, okay, I'm not talking about my study design anymore. Now I'm telling you what we found. And just remember, when they're reading through this section, they won't have access to your figures. They won't have access to your data. So you need to summarize your findings that even without looking at the figures, they still can appreciate their value. So you have your 3 or 4 key findings summarized here. Great, third section is done. Now we can move on to the fourth and last section. In conclusion, in summary. So telling the readers, okay, we're not talking about our key findings anymore. Now I'm telling you what it means, why it's important. Give maybe 1 to 2 sentences, 1 sentence to give your key conclusion, which should be directly related to the problem in the field, showing them you solved the problem, which is why your study is important. But then also make sure that you include, the implications, the last section here. These authors wrote, so it delivers improvements in throughout quality control and facilitating in vitro and in vivo applications of stem cell-derived human kidney tissue. This is why their study is useful. Sometimes I've seen authors, what they've written is, the implications of this study will be discussed. So if I don't download the paper, I'm supposed to guess why it's useful without seeing the data, without reading the article. All I have access to is this short abstract that I read in like 2 minutes. There's no way I'm going to guess why it's useful. You know why your study is useful because it's yours. Share that key information. And it's often these implications that's really going to be increase the likelihood that somebody will want to download your paper. They say these implications are exactly what I'm investigating in my study as well. Therefore, this study is relevant for my research. This is a study I should be familiar with. So as you can see, you simply go through, write these section by section, and then all you have to do is put them together. But now you have a concise abstract that clearly communicates why your study needs to be done, what you did, what you found, and how this study will be useful for the field. All the information that any reader would want to know about your study. So with that, this was the published paper that we had in Nature Materials. So with that, that brings us to the end of our section today, this afternoon, talking about how you can use different types of strategies when writing your paper to really maximize its visibility, discoverability once it's published. Talked about a simple strategy to write an effective title, the importance of keywords, how to identify them, and how to use search engine optimization to improve the discoverability of your paper in those databases. We then talked about the importance of the abstract and how you can really write it clearly and effectively to give the best first impression of your study for your peers, editors, and reviewers. Now I'd like to open up to everyone for a Q&A session. Any questions you have, either about what we talked about publishing, about nature journals, what editors are looking for, any current trends you should be aware of. Any questions people have? I'll start off a question with all of you. So you may notice that for Nature, start talking a little about the Nature portfolio. We have Nature, this is the main journal, broad focused. We then have a range of different nature research journals, Nature Materials, Nature Cell Biology, Nature Medicine, Nature Physics. And then we have Nature Communications. Sometimes people ask me, why? What are the differences? And as an author, how can I really feel confident I'm choosing to submit to the right nature journal? Well, the one thing they all have consistently, they're all interested in a breakthrough, which means you've identified something that's never been published before. That's the one commonality across all of those nature journals. But as we know, sometimes a breakthrough is going to be impactful or interesting or useful to a broad range of people. Sometimes it's going to be only of interest to a smaller group of people. And that's what the different nature journals are meant to do. So the flagship journal Nature, that was established in 1869, is meant to publish research that's going to be of interest to all disciplines. That's one of the key things that editors at Nature look for. Yes, you have a breakthrough. You've achieved something no one else has done before. Well, they're going to be asking themselves, will people from chemistry, physics, biology, medicine, environmental science, will they also find this breakthrough interesting? They may not use it, but they should at least find it valuable or interesting information. If so, great. It's appropriate for the broad readership of Nature. And often the problem we have as researchers, as authors, we're a little bit biased. We think, of course, everyone's going to be interested in my research, Jeff. It's fantastic. Yeah, for us, because we're doing it. Nature editor may disagree. Maybe it is a breakthrough, but it really would only be of interest or be of value to people within your specific field. Maybe just in physics or chemistry or biology. That's what those nature research journals are for. They're really meant for those breakthroughs that are really only going to be appreciated by people within the field. People in another field may say, I don't see why that's such a big deal. That's what those journals are for. And then we have Nature Communications, which actually has two different key functions within our portfolio. One, it could be a breakthrough, but much more specialized. So maybe you think you have really, impactful research in chemistry. You submit to Nature Chemistry, and they say, yes, it's a breakthrough, but you know what? Outside of organic chemistry, nobody else would really find this to be valuable or of interest. So those more kind of specialized breakthroughs usually then get sent or shared with Nature Communications. The other aspect in Nature Communications, like Nature, it's a broad interdisciplinary journal. So if you have interdisciplinary research that doesn't really have the impact that Nature's looking for, again, those are usually sent to Nature Communications instead. And so that's why Nature does have those different types of journals. If you do submit it to the wrong one, don't worry. Many of the publishers, including Nature, have a transfer process. You think it's really impactful, you send it to Nature Catalysis. They say, no, it's not going to be of interest to everyone working on catalysts. And they may then transfer your paper to Nature Communications instead. Of course, upon your approval, they'll ask you first. So even if you don't choose the right journal the first time, the journals will often transfer them. So I started off with a little bit of information. Any questions? Well, I have another question for you. I got lots of questions, but this is an important one and something I think all of you should be aware of. How many of you use ChatGPT writing your papers? No, Jeff. I would never think about using that. Do you think journals allow it? Who thinks, yes, Jeff, most journals say using ChatGPT to help you write your paper is fine? Who thinks, no, Jeff, journals would never allow that? Who's not sure? Actually, for most journals, it's fine. Most journals simply see it as a tool. And just like we're not going to tell you what type of software you could use to analyze your data, we should not tell you what kind of software you can or cannot use to write your paper. But just like using any software to analyze your data, you need to be transparent. So for most journals, what they require, if you are using ChatGPT to help to write the paper, and it can be very useful. It can actually, the output can be really good, clear English. And it's especially useful for people that are not native English speakers. In fact, that's often a disadvantage of non-native English speakers. They're not only struggling with communicating their ideas and the value of those ideas, they're also struggling with how to communicate it in a second or third language. And that's not really fair if native English speakers don't have that extra burden. So I do think ChatGPT does help to level the playing field a bit and makes it a bit more fair for those who are not native English speakers to write the papers. But you have to be transparent, which means that in the methods section of your paper, you have to state that you did use ChatGPT 3.5 or 4.0 or whatever other large language model you're using. That needs to be described. You also have to say which sections of the paper was it being used for. Introduction, methods, discussion, conclusions. Now, I was often worried or concerned about using ChatGPT for unpublished findings. Right? This is this way that these large language models work is they're trained on data. So I was always worried that when you put in information into ChatGPT, it's including that into their training corpus. And so I used to tell researchers, be very careful about using ChatGPT for your results or discussion where you're talking about unpublished information. But I did have the pleasure in December of last year to actually have a conversation with the Chief Technology Officer of OpenAI, Mira, and I asked her that question. If a researcher puts information into ChatGPT, will it be included into the training? In other words, will it be then used as output for someone else? And she said no. And that's why ChatGPT 3.5 is still limited to any information before 2021. Because anything that's been used since then is not included into the training. So she was saying you can feel confident that that information is not going to be repurposed in any kind of way for anyone else. So from her, and that's why I do trust her. She's the one who developed the platform. So I think she knows how it works. So I think you can use it in all sections of your paper, but again, just be transparent. But also my recommendation, don't be over-reliant on using these types of models. Because although these types of models can help you when you're writing a paper, that's great. Well, how about when you're giving a talk at the next conference? You don't have ChatGPT to help you describe your data or your findings then. So I still think you do need to learn how to clearly communicate the value of your research and the value of your ideas in English, not just for writing papers, but when you're having discussions with international colleagues, giving presentations at international conferences. So my recommendation then, if you do use these large language models, learn from them. How did they take your ideas and communicate them in an effective way? And by learning from them, A, you will become a better author. You'll be less reliant on them in the future, but it'll make you a better communicator at conferences or in collaborations as well. Or you may want to go overseas for a postdoc or professor position. But now you have those extra skills to be more effective. Oh, lovely. Please do.
What Nature Journal editors expect in particular from researchers before they pass to reviewers?
So for Nature journals, I'll just want to explain something and compare not just Nature journals, but any journals that use professional editors. Science, Cell, Physical Review Letters, Advanced Materials, Nature journals. Often most of the top journals in the field are journals that use full-time professional editors. What that means is they will read through the entire paper before deciding to send it to peer review. Now, most journals don't use professional editors. They use academics, professors. And as you know, professors are very busy people. Therefore, they don't have time to read the entire paper. So for most academic editors, they're going to be mostly reliant on the cover letter and abstract to decide if they want to send it on to peer review. But for Nature journals, and this is also true for Science, Advanced Materials, and other top journals, they will read through the entire paper. They're also going to evaluate what's been published recently on your topic to try to identify, is this actually new? Or are you simply replicating what others have done? And they're going to carefully look at your data. Does it look like it's well controlled? All the right conditions? Does it look like it's with the current standards in the field? So Nature editors do a much more thorough evaluation. And there are 3 key criteria that a Nature editor would use before sending that paper to peer review. One, as I mentioned earlier, it needs to be a breakthrough. You need to have identified something that's never been shown before. As an example of that, we published a paper many years ago now on Nature Materials, where these authors developed this material, carbon nitride, that could produce hydrogen from water under visible light. That had never been done before. So they got the interest of the editors at Nature Materials and got published. Problem was, it was not an easy process to do. So a lot of other researchers were trying to improve the efficiency and how cost-effective that process was. And the reason I'm using this as an example, one of my colleagues when I worked at Singapore was in one of these groups. And they did find a way to improve the efficiency of that process. They submitted their paper to Nature Materials, rejected. Submitted the paper to Nature Chemistry, rejected. Why? The editor said, this has already been shown. Now, they did get published in Engawanti Chemi, which is still a very good quality chemistry journal, but they could not get published in those Nature journals because that striking breakthrough showing something that has not been done before was crucial in the editorial evaluation. So that's the first key thing they look at. Second thing, as I mentioned, they will look through your data. They want to make sure that this big, bold claim that you're making is being supported with the right techniques, under the right conditions, and you have a lot of evidence to support that claim. I think if you look at most nature journals, you'll often see there's maybe only 4 or 5 figures in the main text. And then you look at supplementary text, and there's like 20 more figures, 10 more tables, simply because they and the reviewers will require a lot of information to support this bold claim that you have a breakthrough. Third key thing is in terms of broad relevance. Most nature journals are broad focused journals. Some are very broad, like Nature. Others are less broad, but still across an entire field, like Nature Neuroscience. So they want to make sure that your findings, that your breakthrough is going to be of interest to that broad audience. And particularly, I think, for most high impact journals, they're often looking for societal implications. So if you have research that's not going to be of interest or of use just to academics, but maybe more broadly could be explored commercially or have impact on society more broadly, then those types of papers generally will be of greater interest to nature journal editors than those that are really just focused on academia alone. But it will depend, of course, on the field. So those are the 3 key criteria that you should keep in mind when you're trying to decide about choosing a nature journal: striking breakthrough, enough well-controlled evidence to support that claim, and broad-reaching interest and implications for the field or more broadly for society. If you have all 3 and your colleagues agree with you, so we're not letting that bias influence your decision, then I certainly encourage you to submit the paper to the nature journal of your choice. Great question. Yes, sir.
Is there any limitation of the ratio for each field? Because when, for example, when 10 papers were already published in catalysis in the Nature, maybe no more catalysis section.
Great question. His question is be related to redundancy. So let's say the topic that you're working on, maybe in catalysis, that you look in that Nature journal, maybe you're looking at a specific catalyst, and you're thinking about submitting to Nature Catalysis, and then you realize maybe you work on PET hydrolases, and you look at Nature Catalysis, and you've seen they published like 15 papers on PET hydrolases in the last 2 or 3 years. So in that case, you do need to worry about being redundant, just simply repeating what they've already done. They may look at that this study is not really adding much value. My suggestion in those cases, look at those papers. What did they do? How did they do it? What did they achieve? And what's different and unique about your study? And make that unique aspect of your study the key message of the paper. Because that will make it stand out to the Nature editor that, yes, I know you've published several papers on this topic already, but this aspect of the topic has not yet been addressed. And that's how our paper is adding to the value that your journal is contributing related to that topic for the field. Yeah, it's a very important thing to consider when you're choosing journals. And I think it's a nice way to then try to position the key message in the paper and especially in the cover letter so the editor doesn't feel it's going to be redundant. Great question.
There are no ratio for each, 10% for physics, 10% for chemistry.
No, especially for nature. So nature's generally, you can look at it, it's mostly like half and half, physical sciences, life sciences. So that's one thing for Nature, the broad journal, it's in general, half physical sciences, half life sciences. Sometimes tends to be a bit more skewed towards life sciences. Main reason why is that often life science research has more important societal implications, which again feeds into whether or not this is going to be of interest. But in general, we try to keep it about half-half. Now, within physical sciences, it's really dependent on the papers that we get. Sometimes there's a lot more papers related to catalysis. Maybe next time there's more papers on organic synthesis, et cetera, in physics. So it's really dependent on the value of those papers. But broadly, we try to keep it as close as we can to half-half physical and life sciences. Any other questions? How many of you are going to submit to a Nature journal this year? 2024 is your year. You'd be optimistic. You have a great study. And I do encourage you, when you go to conferences, editors are frequently going to conferences to network with all of you. So if you're at a conference and you see there's a Nature editor there, don't shy away from them. Talk to them. Find out what their interests are. What are the key trends that that journal is going to be focusing on for the year? That can give you some ideas or inspirations for your next research topic that you want to investigate. You know, maybe too late for what you're currently working on, but when you hear about the Nature editors or what you see at the conference, here's the next big thing. Well, maybe for your next research topic, you may want to consider exploring that, because it may increase the chances that your paper will get published by any other good high impact journal as well. Take the opportunities when possible to just talk about your research with Nature editors. They appreciate to hear what you're doing, and they can give you some really great advice and insights as well. So with that, I'd like to lastly encourage, there's a lot of direct advice from Nature editors in the Nature Masterclasses online. Lots of videos from editors from a variety of different Nature journals, giving you their experiences, what are some common pitfalls and problems, and advice and strategies to overcome them. So again, it's free for you. Nothing to, no reason why you shouldn't, but I do encourage you to explore that content. And also, my email's at the bottom. If you ever have any specific questions you would like to ask me tomorrow, next month, just remind me, Jeff, I was at that seminar you gave at Chonnam National University. I had this question or having a problem with this editor. What advice would you give me? And it'd be my pleasure to help you. So with that, I'd like to thank all of you, both online and in person, for your attention this afternoon. And I would like to wish all of you best of luck in 2024 and your academic careers after that as well. Thank you so much.